We continue now at the top of Daf Meseches Meseches Bava Metzia. This is Bava Metzia Daf 68b. On the previous summit, the Mishnah said that you can't give, let's say, to a storekeeper that you're going to give him products and he'll do business with those products, and the idea will be that you'll take half of the profit and half of the losses. And the reason why that's problematic is essentially the reason why he's taking all this effort on your behalf is because of the loan you're extending to him, and that's why it's a problem of ribis, it's a problem of interest. And the Mishnah says the only way that you can avoid interest in this situation is if you pay him for his efforts. And the Gemara said in the previous summit that when we say you pay him like a poel, like a worker, it means like a poel bata, like a worker who's doing nothing. And the question of the Gemara was, why would you pay him like a worker who's doing nothing? This person is doing something. He's making efforts in order to sell the merchandise. And so the Gemara answers, Amar Abaya says, Kipoel batal shel osa malacha, the batal mina, we just mean to say, you have to pay him like a worker who's not doing the work that he's not able to do because he is doing this. How much would you pay such a person? Rashi explains, Amar Abaya, Kipoel batal shel osa malacha, the batal mina, you pay him like a poel batal from that particular work that he would have been doing otherwise, meaning imhaya nagar o nafach kama adam rotze lito livatal mi malacha kaveda. You pay him how much would a person want to be paid in order not to do a difficult labor, kazu, like these difficult labors, velasos, malacha kala, instead to do something easier. How much would a person want for that? And the Gemara continues with tzricha, and it's necessary to teach all the various cases in the Mishnah. There were a number of cases in the Mishnah like this. The Itana chenvani, because if we only had the case of the storekeeper, chenvani who desagi like a poel batal, maybe by a chenvani it's enough to pay him like a poel batal. Mishum delo nafesh tirche, because it's not that much of a burden, it's not that much of an effort to sell if he's already a storekeeper. Avol mos likach ben peiros, but if you're giving him money that he's going to buy produce that he has to again make money off of, the nafesh tirche, that's already more effort. Emelo sagi like a poel batal, I might say it's not enough to pay him like a poel batal. V'itana mos likach ben peiros, if I only had the case of money to purchase produce, havamina, I would have thought hasam hu deboy ke poel batal, there you need to pay him like a poel batal, mishum de nafesh tirche, because again that takes more effort. Aval chenvani de lo nafesh tirche, but by a storekeeper where it's not a lot of effort, emosagi le v'mashu bi'alma, I might think it's enough just to give him just anything. Diafilu lo taval imo ela betzir, let's say he just dipped with him a little in fish brine, v'lo achal imo ela grogras achas, or he just ate with him just one fig, zeu secharo, that could be enough of the payment, so tzricha, so that's why it's necessary to say, over there as well, it needs to be like a poel batal. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Kama hu secharo, how much are the wages, Bein meruba uvein mua, to divrei Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says, whether it's a lot or a little, we'll see Rashi in a moment. Rabbi Yehuda says, Afilu lo tavalimo ela betzir, even if he just dips with him in fish brine, just dips some bread in fish brine with him, v'lo achal imo ela grogras achas, or he just eats with him one dried fig, zeu secharo, that's enough payment. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai says, no sein lo, secharo meshulam, he gives him his full pay. And Rashi explains, Rabbi Yehuda mekel tfei mi de Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda is more lenient than Rabbi Meir. To Rabbi Meir, boy sheyifsok l'shum schar. Rabbi Meir says you have to set some kind of a payment. Umiu b'chol ma sheyos l'kabel ola b'scharo ben rab ben ma'at. Nevertheless, whatever he accepts to take with payment, that's what it means, whether it's a lot or a little. Ha'kabel ola, that's what he accepts, and that's fine. Rabbi Yehuda lo boy sheyifsok l'shum schar. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, you don't even need to set up any real wages. Ela yitvol imo b'tzir kachem min hashuk. Just dip with him in fish brine like somebody from the marketplace, or a grogres, tani avesha, just a dried fig. That's enough. And then finally we had the opinion of Rav Shimon bar Yochai. He has to be paid mishulam kepoel batal, meaning he has to be paid full like a poel batal, as we said above. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Ein shaman lo eso izim v'lo eso rechelim v'lo kol davar sheinu oso v'yochel amechsu. You're not allowed to evaluate the goats or the sheep or anything that does not produce revenue and it consumes. You're not allowed to set that up again for this kind of scenario of half profit, because in such a scenario, the effort that the person is making, that's essentially considered to be like ribis, as we said above. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda says, shaman eso izim. You are allowed to evaluate the goats in this fashion, m'nei shecholvos, because they produce milk, so therefore the person who's making the effort can be compensated with the milk. And also when it comes to the sheep, because you can shear them, and when they are rinsed off, so again you have wool that you can take. If you can take the wool, that's considered essentially payment for the effort. And also the chicken, because that also, it produces revenue. You have eggs over there, and therefore again there's not a problem. And the Gemara says, "V'Tanakama gizav cholav lo sipek l'schara molo u'mizono." But according to Tanakama, the shearings and the milk is not enough to pay him for his efforts and for the mizonos that he spent, for the food that he spent on. And the Gemara answers to that, "Begizav v'cholav kuli alma lo pligi." Nobody disagrees when it comes to shearings and milk. That certainly is sufficient. But the Gemara says, "Ki pligi." When do they argue? "B'nisyove v'tosre." They argue about the whey, meaning to say essentially it's not actually the milk. What if he's just getting the whey of the milk? And then tosre refers to the pluckings of the wool. It's not really the shearings. So that already is pretty insignificant. Tanakama savar like Reb Shimon ben Yochai. The Tanakama holds like Reb Shimon bar Yochai. Domar nosin lo schar mishul. They have to have, it has to be full wages, and that would certainly not be enough. The whey and the pluckings would not be enough. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda savar la kavua, but Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda he holds like his father. Diamar afilu lo tav alimo ela betzir v'lo achalimo ela grogar sachas, who says even if he just dips with him in fish brine, even if he just eats one dried fig, zeu scharu, that's enough payment, and so therefore the whey and the pluckings would be sufficient. And Rashi explains, "V'lo kol davar she'eino osav yochel." You can't set up this arrangement with anything that doesn't produce any revenue, but it eats. Aval osav yochel, but if it does produce revenue and it eats, kagon para hachoreshes, for example, let's say you have a cow that plows, v'chamor hatoenes masoi, or a donkey that's able to carry a load, pu'ulasan huscharam lamosan. So the work that they do, that revenue they produce, that will be the payment for the efforts in the food. V'shotfos, and then we said the shearings, and also shotfos also refers to the wool. Kishaovin bin nohar hamayim shotvin min hagizo v'hunotla. When the animal goes through the river, so the water takes off the shearings, and he could take that. Umortos, or it gets pulled off. Kishaovros bein hakotzim. When the animal goes through the thorns, again, it's referring to the shearings that gets pulled off by the thorns. V'tanakama gizav cholav lo sipek b'schar amola mazono b'tzmiya. The Gemara is asking, according to Tanakama, the shearings and the milk is not enough payment. V'chi giza shel rechelim v'cholav ha'izam eino maspek l'schar amola mazon. Again, is that not enough? And the Gemara answer to that, "Begiza v'cholav kuli alma lo pligi imneos bal habehema shelo lachlok behen." If the owner of the animal says he's not going to take those, that can go to the person for the effort that they are expending, then everybody agrees that's sufficient. But they're arguing, "Benisyove is mei psolas hacholav shakar mishka." Again, that refers to the whey of the milk. V'tosrei yishtifa sumritas or achelim. Tosrei just refers to, again, the wool that only comes, that's rinsed off in the rivers or plucked out, but not the real shearings. That's what they're arguing about. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanon, the rabbis taught, Maskeres isha lechaverta tarnagolas b'shnei afrochen. A woman can rent out to her friend a chicken for 2 chicks, meaning to say that the woman is going to give the chicken over to the other woman, and then that chicken is going to sit on her eggs, and it's going to create a certain amount of profit, and the pay will essentially be 2 chicks that come from these eggs. So that is allowed. Isha shamar lechaverta, and if a woman says to her friend, Tarnagolas shali, the chicken will be mine, ubeitzim shalichi, and then the eggs will be yours. V'ani viat nachluk b'afrochen, and you and I, we're going to split 50-50, we'll split the chicks. Rabbi Yehuda matir, Rabbi Shimon osir. Rabbi Yehuda says it's mutter, and Rabbi Shimon says it is osir. And Rashi explains, Maskeres isha lechaverta tarnagolas b'shnei afrochen. Again, a woman can rent out to her friend a chicken for 2 chicks. Lashana means to say 2 chicks a year is going to be the payment. Isha sha'amra, a woman that says, and Rashi explains, Isha sheyesh la tarnagolas. The case would be as follows. A woman has a chicken. Muteres lomer lebalas habeitzim. She can then say to the owner of the eggs, B'lashon schiris, if it's done in a language of rental, that everyone agrees is okay. She'll say as follows, Tanili beitzim, give me the eggs. V'oshiv tarnagolas aleim, and then I'll put the chicken on top of them. Ve'etrach befrochim, I'll do all the efforts when it comes to raising the chicks. Ve'etel shnei afrochim b'schari, and then for my efforts, I'm going to be paid 2 chicks. That is certainly allowed. Essentially, what she's saying is she's going to do a certain amount of effort, and she's going to get payment for it. She's being hired. That's no problem. Aval b'loshen chalukah, but if it's done in a language of division, again, where you're dividing like 50% of the profits, like the cases on the previous summer in the Mishnah, so there pligiba. So there we have a machlokas tanoim. The ka'asar Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon says it's prohibited. The chol loshen chalukah iskahi ukrova lehefsid kischar, because anytime you're doing this kind of division, it's a kind of business arrangement where you could lose or you could gain. And if that's the case, there could be a loss or there could be a gain. So that essentially means that she's taking responsibility for half of the eggs. So ishtakach palga milva, comes out that half of this is a loan, and so therefore, really she's expending her efforts in terms of raising these chicks. And the reason why she's doing that is because of the fact she was extended a loan. That's a problem of interest. Avol beloshen schiris, but if it's done in a language of hiring, ein achrayis habeitzim al balas hatarnagolas. So then the responsibility for the eggs is not on the owner of the chicken, and that's why in that situation it's okay. But the Gemara continues, Rabbi Yehuda lo boy schar amalo mizono. Does Rabbi Yehuda not require payment for the effort and for the mizonos? Meaning, how does Rabbi Yehuda say it's mutter in a situation where they make the arrangement that the person is going to get 50% of the profits, but also assumes the risk as well, 50%? That should be problematic. If the reason why they're expending effort is because they were extended a loan, that should be a problem of ribis. Don't you have to pay for the person's effort and for the mizonos they're providing? And the Gemara answers to that, Ika beitzim muzaros, that you have the unfertilized eggs. The unfertilized eggs, that person who's expending the efforts is going to keep. That is considered payment, and that's why it's not a problem, according to Rabbi Yehuda. And Rashi explains, Ika beitzim muzaros she'enon koltos efroach, meaning the unfertilized eggs where it's not going to hatch a chick. V'not losan b'schara, she'll take that as her payment. V'hein mutaros b'achilan, those are allowed to be eaten. De'amrinam b'shchitas chulin beitzim muzaros nefesh hayafetochlan, that's why we say in chulin that it's kosher to eat those. For Rabbi Yehuda l'taim, and Rabbi Yehuda follows his opinion. Di'amar afilu tavalimo b'tzir, he says even if you just dip with him in fish brine, zeu scharo, that's sufficient payment. For Rabbi Shimon l'taim, and Rabbi Shimon follows his opinion. Di'amar notel schar meshulam, he says that it has to be a real wages, a full pay. And the Gemara continues, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Makom shenohagu lahalos schar kosef lemos lebehema malin vein meshanin miminok hamadina. If it's a place where the custom is to pay the person for carrying the animals, to add that on to the compensation, then you must do that, and you can't change from the local custom. Rashi explains, Hachi garsinan makam shanagu lahalos schar kosef lemos lebehema malin means as follows: Makam shanagu shahashim agolim v'sayachim ketanim lemechzel chaveru. Let's say it's a place where they have a custom to evaluate the calves and the young horses, and they do it for half profit. Again, you have a situation where somebody's essentially raising these animals, and the idea is that he's going to get half of the profit, but he's also going to cover half of the losses in case there is a loss. And so we said that in that situation you could have a problem of ribis, because the person is exerting effort to raise these animals, and he's doing that in return for the fact that he was lent money, essentially. And so that's a problem of ribis unless you pay him for his efforts. So that's what it's saying over here. In a place where the custom is to do this, nosein lo mos b'schar shemotzion u'machnisan al ksefo malin. Let's say the custom is that you give him money also for the fact, you give him wages for the fact that he's carrying this animal around on his shoulder. If that is the custom, then that is what is done. Essentially, you're paying him for his efforts. And the Gemara continues, Rav Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says, Shaman egel im imo v'sayach im imo. We can evaluate a calf with its mother and a young horse with its mother. V'afilu b'makom shenagu lahalos schar kasef lemos. Even in a place where in general the custom is that you do pay the person for carrying around the animal, that particular payment doesn't apply in this case because the animal simply follows its mother. Rashi explains, im imo with its mother, to lekatircha, there's no effort, lafuke uleyule, to bring the animal out and in, lafisha nimshach acharimo, because the animal simply follows its mother. Uvelo amal mazon, there's no effort, you don't need mazon, you don't need any sustenance. Ki imo osavo chelas, because the mother takes care of everything. The mother animal does the work, the mother animal provides the food. Vein sarach lahalos lo schar kasef. So the point is, in such a case, you don't need to pay any wages for that carrying around. That's what Rav Shimon ben Gamliel is saying. And so the Gemara continues, Rav Shimon ben Gamliel lo boy schar amalo mizono. But Rav Shimon ben Gamliel in general doesn't require any payment for the efforts. Fact of the matter is, if the person is going in on a situation where he can make 50% of the profit, but he also takes upon himself 50% of any loss, so again, in exchange for the loan that's being extended, he's making some efforts. Why doesn't he need to be paid at all? Shouldn't there be a problem then of ribis? And so the Gemara answers, Iko Galalim. The Gemara answers, no, there is the dung from the animal. That is like a small amount of payment, and that counts as the payment according to Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. The Gemara says, V'idach. Now the other opinion, the one that argues with Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, says, no, Galalim afkure mafkir lahu. The Galalim in general, the dung, is considered ownerless, so it can't be considered to be payment at all. And the Gemara continues at the Tudah. Somewhere of Nachman says, Halacha k'Reb Yehuda, v'halacha k'Reb Yossi b'Reb Yehuda, v'halacha k'Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. The halacha is like Reb Yehuda, the halacha is like Reb Yossi b'Reb Yehuda, and the halacha is like Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. And Rashi explains, K'Reb Yehuda, b'tav al imo b'tzir, meaning the payment in these cases where you're going in for 50% of the profit, it can be very small, even just dipping with the person in his fish brine, a little bit of bread. K'Reb Yossi b'Reb Yehuda, similarly, the halacha is like Reb Yossi b'Reb Yehuda, b'nisiyove v'tosrei. We said again that even if the payment is just the whey from the milk, and even if the payment is just the plucking from the wool, the pluckings from the wool, that's going to be enough. And similarly, Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, we just quoted above, that the glolim, even if you have a situation of a small amount of payment, that is going to be enough. And the Gemara continues, B'nei Ravilish nafak alayu aushtara davakasabe palga ba'agar palga behefsid. The children of Ravilish, so Ravilish died, and there was a star that they found. The star said that he engaged in this kind of business arrangement where he would take half the profit, but if there was a loss, then he would be responsible for half the loss. So this seemed to be problematic. Why was he involved in a business transaction like this? Isn't this a problem of ribis, as we have said? And so the Gemara says, Amar Rava says, Ravilish gavra rabahu. Ravilish was a great person. V'isur le'inshei lo havesafi. He wouldn't give isser to somebody. He wouldn't be involved in a situation of interest. And so therefore we must be missing something in terms of the arrangement. And so therefore manavshach, it must be either way you look at it, one way or the other. Ipalga ba'agar, for example, let's say he took half in terms of the profit. So then there would have been trei tilsi behefsid, then there would have been 2/3 in terms of the loss. And Rashi explains, Nafak alayu shtara shekibel avim iska palga ba'agar or palga behefsid. Again, their father accepted some kind of transaction, half profit, but he would be responsible for half the loss. And Rashi continues that Rava said, Lo havesafi, that Ravilish would not give isser to somebody. Lo haya machil ribis labalabayis. He wouldn't give ribis interest to a balabayis. Because if he accepted a situation like this, ribisahu, it's again a situation of interest. The katarach bepalga to pikadon, because now he's making efforts in the half that is a pikadon, mishum palga de milva, because of the half that is being extended to him as a loan. Elavada shtara hachim efarshinon. Rather, it must be that the shtara explained as follows: Lelishne shekibel olav ezem hem sheyirtza. There must be something in the language of the shtar that you accept one of the following. Ipalga yekabel hanosin biagro. What it means is as follows. Let's say, for example, the person who's giving is going to accept half in terms of the profit. So then yekabel olav achrayas hahefsid yoser mimechtzis. So then it must be that he's accepting responsibility for the loss more than half. And Rashi explains, Kagon, for example, trei tilsi, for example, 2/3. The hashda leka ribis, because now you won't have a situation of ribis. The hashda leka ela tilsa milve, because if you're going to say that the person who's giving it to Rav Ilish, that in this situation that person is accepting, in terms of the loss, he's accepting 2/3. So if he's accepting 2/3 of the loss, that means that Rav Ilish was only really lent 1/3 as a loan. To lo kibel ale Rav Ilish ela tilsa bachrayuso, because Rav Ilish is only accepting 1/3 in terms of the level of his responsibility, so he's accepting 1/3 as a loan. The kashakel palga biagran, even though he's only doing 1/3 as a loan, he's taking 50% of the profit. V'havemai the shakel biagrat tzfei tilsa scharamalo, and so therefore that which he's taking as a profit is more than the third that he has in terms of his efforts letroach shuosik b'shnei shlishi pikadon, for that effort that he's putting in the 2/3 that is a pikadon, and so therefore that would be the payment for his efforts. We won't have to worry there about a situation of ribis. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf 68b Amud Aleph.